I've been behind the wheel for most of the night, and I don't know where else to share this. So I figured I'd post it here while I still have a decent signal. I'm a long-haul delivery driver. I've done these routes so many times, they all start to blur together. Same highways, same rest stops, same long, empty stretches where it feels like the rest of the world just drops off past the edge of your headlights. This whole thing started sometime after midnight on one of those quiet sections between towns. The road was almost completely empty. I first noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. Not too close, not too far back, just sitting there at a steady distance. At first, I didn't think much of it. You see that kind of thing all the time on long drives. Someone ends up matching your speed without even realizing it. But after about an hour, I started to feel like something was off. Those headlights hadn't moved at all. They weren't getting closer and they weren't falling back. They stayed locked in exactly the same spot behind me, like they were stuck there. I sped up a little, just to test it. They stayed right where they were, so I slowed down. Same result. I told myself I was probably just tired. Long hours on the road at night can make your mind play tricks and start seeing patterns that aren't really there. I kept driving anyway. A couple of hours later, I pulled into a small fuel stop in one of those tiny towns where half the lights are off, even though the place is supposed to be open. I got out, stretched my legs, and started filling up the tank. That's when I spotted it. The same car was parked way off to the side of the lot, nowhere near the pumps. Engine off, lights off, just sitting there in the shadows. It looked like a dark sedan, maybe black or dark gray. The windows were heavily tinted, so dark I couldn't see anything inside. I stood there longer than I needed to, just watching it and waiting for someone to get out. No one did. No door opened, no interior light came on, nothing moved. I convinced myself it was just another driver taking a break, which happens a lot on these trips. I finished fueling, climbed back into the truck, and pulled out onto the highway again. When I checked my mirrors, there were no headlights behind me. For a minute, I actually felt a little silly for letting it get to me at all. That feeling lasted about 15 minutes. Then, out of nowhere, those same headlights were right there again in my mirror. Same exact distance, same position. It was like they had never left. That's when the uneasy feeling really started to settle in. I changed lanes a few times. They changed lanes with me. I sped up. They matched my speed perfectly. I slowed way down, almost crawling compared to how I had been going. They stayed right there. They never tried to pass me, and they never fell back. That part bothered me the most. On a long, empty highway, any normal driver would eventually go around or take an exit. This one just stayed behind me the whole time. I crossed into another state a while later. I remember seeing the welcome sign and feeling a small wave of relief, like maybe crossing the line would somehow end whatever this was. It didn't. The car came right along with me. Hours passed like that. Just me, the dark road, and those headlights locked in place behind me. I tried to distract myself. I turned up the music, rolled the window down to let in some fresh air, anything to make the drive feel normal again. But every time I glanced in the mirror, they were still there. Same distance, same position. It started to feel less like someone was driving and more like the car was simply following. Eventually, I got fed up and decided to force the issue. I slowed down enough that any reasonable driver would have taken the chance to go around me. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the headlights shifted over into the lane beside mine. The car started pulling up alongside me, moving slowly and smoothly. I gripped the steering wheel tighter without even meaning to. I turned my head just enough to look without staring. It was the same dark sedan, clean and undamaged. No license plate visible from my angle. The windows were so dark, they seemed to swallow the light instead of reflecting it. For a moment, I thought I could make out a shape in the driver's seat, so I looked properly. That's when my stomach dropped. The driver's seat was empty, not hidden or leaning over, just completely empty. No one behind the wheel, but the car kept moving perfectly steady, staying right next to me and matching my speed exactly. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't quite catch my breath. I forced my eyes back to the road ahead and held the wheel as steady as I could. After a little while, the car started to accelerate. It pulled ahead of me without any sudden movement, just gliding forward quietly. I watched its taillights get smaller and smaller until they disappeared over a gentle curve in the road. I let out a shaky breath and even managed a small laugh from the pure relief of it finally being gone. I told myself it was over and kept driving. That feeling lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then I checked my mirror again. The headlights were back, same distance, same position, like nothing had happened. There had been no exits, no side roads, no way for it to turn around and get behind me again. Yet, there it was, exactly where it had been before. I haven't stopped since then. I'm in another county now, still moving, still checking my mirrors way more often than I should. The headlights are still there. I'm sitting at a stop right now with the engine running, trying to decide whether I should just wait here until the sun comes up. But I already know it probably won't change anything, because when I look in the mirror, I can still see it. It's right behind me, in the exact same spot, not moving any closer or farther away, just waiting. I don't know what this is or what I'm supposed to do. I've driven these roads for years, and nothing like this has ever happened before. If anyone has ever experienced something similar or has any idea what could be going on, I'd really appreciate hearing about it. I'm just trying to get through the rest of this night in one piece. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers. Honestly, I don't know what came over me that night. I've driven that same lonely stretch of road so many times, I could probably do it with my eyes closed. It runs through a long, empty part of the state. Nothing but trees, open fields, and the occasional old, broken-down fence. During the day, it's quiet, but at night, it feels endless. No streetlights, hardly any houses, just your headlights cutting through the dark and whatever might be hiding just beyond them. It had been raining steadily for a while that evening. Not a downpour, just that constant drizzle that makes the pavement slick and turns everything outside the windshield into a blurry mess. The wipers kept swishing back and forth in that steady rhythm that can make your mind wander if you're not careful. I kept thinking I probably should have stayed in town and gotten a room instead of heading back so late, but I really wanted to sleep in my own bed. I always do after a long day. I was about halfway through the county when I first spotted him. At first I thought it was just a signpost or something standing near the shoulder. Then my headlights caught him fully and I realized it was a person. He wasn't waving or trying to flag anyone down. He was just standing there, completely still. That alone should have been enough for me to keep driving, but for some reason I slowed down anyway. I still can't explain why. Maybe it was the rain, maybe it was how motionless he looked, like he had been waiting there a long time, not just for any car, but specifically for mine. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pulled over a little ways ahead of him. He walked up to the passenger side, opened the door, and climbed in without a word. That part unsettled me right away. He didn't thank me or ask if it was okay. He just sat down, closed the door softly, and buckled his seatbelt like he had ridden with me before. I glanced over at him while I pulled back onto the road. He looked to be in his mid-30s. Nothing unusual about his appearance. What struck me, though, was that he wasn't as wet as he should have been. His clothes were damp, sure, but not drenched like someone who had been standing out in the rain for any length of time. We drove in silence for a short while, the kind of quiet that feels extra heavy when there's a stranger sitting right next to you. Then, out of nowhere, he said my name, not like he was guessing or asking a question, just stated it calmly, as if he already knew it for certain. That sent a cold feeling through my stomach. It spread slowly, the way bad news sometimes does. I asked if I knew him from somewhere. He shook his head slightly, eyes fixed straight ahead on the road, and told me I had passed him before. That didn't make any sense to me. I drive this route all the time, and I was sure I would have remembered seeing someone standing out there like that. I mentioned that I had never noticed him on any of my trips. He just gave a small nod, like he had expected me to say exactly that. He added that most people don't notice. I didn't like how that sounded. I tried to keep the conversation ordinary and asked where he was coming from. Maybe his car had broken down or something, but instead of answering, he started talking about me. Not general things you could guess from looking at someone. He mentioned the town where I live, saying it like it was the most normal thing in the world. Then, he brought up how I had almost missed my exit the week before because I was tired. That was true. I had drifted right past it and only caught it at the last second. Next, he mentioned that I always turn the radio off on this particular stretch of road because I hate it when the signal drops out in the middle of a song. That one really shook me. It wasn't something I had ever told anyone. It wasn't even a habit I consciously thought about. It was just something I did automatically every time. I asked him straight out how he could possibly know that. He kept staring ahead at the road and simply said that I had driven through here enough times for patterns to show. My grip on the steering wheel tightened without me realizing it. I became aware of every little sound, the rain tapping on the roof, the tires on the wet pavement, and him sitting there so calmly. Then he said something that made me ease off the gas without thinking. He told me to watch the next curve because there was going to be a truck stopped halfway in my lane. I looked over at him, confused. He added that it hadn't happened yet, but it would. There was something in his voice that made me take the warning seriously, even though none of it made logical sense. I kept driving, eyes now glued to the road. The rain felt like it had gotten heavier, or maybe I was just paying much closer attention. As we approached the long right-hand bend he had mentioned, with trees crowding close to the shoulder, my chest started to feel tight. And then I saw it exactly as he had described. A truck, parked at an odd angle, half blocking the lane, with its hazard lights flashing. I had to slow way down and carefully steer around it. As I passed, I glanced at the clock out of habit. The time matched what he had implied just minutes earlier, like he had known precisely when we would reach that spot. After that, I didn't know what to say, so we continued in silence for another few minutes. Eventually, he told me I could let him out right there. I looked around and saw nothing. No side road, no driveway, no lights at all. Just trees and darkness. I pointed out that there was nothing around. He simply nodded and said he knew. Something in me didn't want to argue. I slowed down and pulled over. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out into the rain. His clothes still didn't look soaked. He closed the door gently, just like when he got in, and then he was gone. When I looked back, I couldn't see him anywhere. It wasn't like he walked off dramatically. He was just no longer there. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of everything, then continued driving. All I wanted was to get past that empty stretch of road as quickly as possible. A few miles later, I reached a small pull-off area. Nothing fancy, just a spot to stop and stretch your legs. I figured I would park for a minute, catch my breath, and try to convince myself the whole thing had been a strange coincidence. As I pulled in, though, I started noticing little details. A car parked at a weird angle, like the driver had left in a rush. A light flickering near the entrance. Some debris on the ground that looked freshly fallen. Each thing matched small comments he had made during the drive. Comments I hadn't fully registered at the time, but now stood out clearly. I parked the car and left the engine running. My heart was still beating fast. After a minute, I glanced over at the passenger seat. That's when it hit me. The seat was completely dry. No watermarks, no damp spots, nothing at all from someone who had supposedly been standing in the rain. I reached over and touched the fabric, just to be sure. It was bone dry. That realization has stayed with me ever since. If he wasn't wet when he got in, and the seat stayed dry after he left, then maybe he hadn't really been sitting there the way I thought he had. What bothers me the most, though, is what he said about passing him before. Since that night, I've driven the same road again several times, and every time it starts to rain, I catch myself scanning the side of the road without meaning to, just in case he's standing there again, waiting for me to notice him once more. I've been driving trucks for a long time now, long enough that most things on the road don't really get to me anymore. You see all kinds of weird stuff out there, especially on the late night runs that nobody else wants to take. After a while, you just learn to keep your eyes on the road, your hands steady on the wheel, and your mind on getting paid. Most nights blend together, but there's one job from a couple years back that still doesn't sit right with me. I think about it more than I should. It started like any other dispatch call, late in the afternoon. They told me to head out to a small yard just outside a quiet town in northern Arizona and pick up a sealed trailer. Nothing out of the ordinary at first. What caught my attention was how careful they were with the instructions. They made it very clear that I was not supposed to break the seal under any circumstance. I wasn't to stop unless it was an absolute emergency, and I had to stick exactly to the route they gave me. The last part, they really hammered home. Keep moving, no matter what. When I asked what I was hauling, they just said it was standard freight, nothing hazardous, nothing that needed special temperature control, just easy money for a long haul. I figured it was one of those jobs where you don't ask too many questions. When I pulled into the yard, there wasn't much to it. No real office building, just a fenced lot with a few trailers parked under some weak lights. One guy was waiting by the gate. He barely spoke. He checked my identification, handed me a clipboard to sign, and pointed toward the trailer I was supposed to take. It was already sealed up tight with a thick metal latch and a numbered tag that looked official. I did my usual quick walk around, hooked it up, and got on the road without any trouble. The route they sent me on was different from what I normally run. It stayed away from the big highways and stuck to these long, empty back roads. There were stretches where you wouldn't see a gas station, a rest area, or even another town for dozens of miles. Just open land, scrub brush, and a narrow strip of pavement cutting through it all. The sun went down pretty quick, and I settled into that familiar rhythm you get on long drives. Engine humming, radio playing low in the background. A few hours in, I noticed something odd. There was a shift in the trailer behind me. Not the usual sound of boxes sliding or a pallet settling that I've heard plenty of times before. This was slower and heavier, like something big was adjusting its position. I checked my mirrors, but everything looked steady. No sway, no sign that the load was moving around badly. I told myself it was probably just uneven weight distribution and tried to shake it off. Then it happened again. This time it felt more deliberate. Whatever was back there seemed to move from one side of the trailer to the other, pause, and then shift again. I glanced at the weight sensor on my dash. The numbers were jumping around a little, going up and down by a few hundred pounds before settling. That didn't make sense. Loads don't just move themselves like that unless something inside is actually walking or crawling around. I gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter and kept telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe some piece of equipment that wasn't tied down properly. Maybe something on wheels that had come loose. Still, it didn't feel right. I thought about pulling over to check the seal and make sure nothing looked wrong, but I remembered the instructions they gave me. No stops. Keep moving no matter what. So I stayed on the road. The further I drove, the darker and emptier it got. No streetlights, no other cars passing by. Just my headlights cutting through the night and the steady sound of the engine. Every so often that movement would start up again. I tried to ignore it and focus on driving, but it was hard not to notice. Hours went by like that. I kept pretending nothing was happening while the trailer kept reminding me that something was. Around 2 a.m, I finally had to stop because I was getting low on fuel. There was one small county gas station marked on the route, the only one for miles around. I pulled into the empty lot, set the brakes, and let the engine idle while the headlights lit up the quiet pavement. There wasn't another soul around. The moment I stopped, I heard a clear knock coming from inside the trailer. I sat there frozen with my hand still on the wheel, just listening. After a few seconds of silence, there was another knock, slower and heavier this time. It didn't sound random, like something falling over. It felt like it was trying to get my attention, like a signal. I got out of the cab before I could talk myself out of it. The night air was cold, and the whole place was too quiet. My boots sounded loud on the pavement as I walked back toward the trailer. The seal was still completely intact. I stood there staring at it, trying to decide what to do next. That's when the knocking stopped, and something else started. A long, slow scraping sound along the inside wall of the trailer, like whatever was in there had real weight to it and was dragging itself from one end to the other. I took a step back without even thinking about it. The sound moved along the wall and then stopped right behind the doors. I could feel it there, just on the other side of the metal, waiting. I didn't touch the seal. I didn't even reach toward it. I turned around, walked straight back to the cab, and climbed in. My hands were shaking a little as I put the truck in gear. I didn't finish filling up with fuel. I didn't check anything else. I just left that station as quickly as I could. For the rest of the drive, The trailer stayed completely quiet. No more shifting, no knocking, no scraping. That silence actually bothered me more than the noises had. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting something to happen, but nothing did. I reached the drop-off point just before sunrise in a rural part of New Mexico. It was another isolated spot with almost nothing around, except one plain warehouse-style building. A couple of guys were already waiting. They didn't say much. One of them just pointed where to back in. I parked, shut off the engine, and stepped down. One guy walked over to the trailer, checked the seal, and gave a nod. The other cut it open. I stayed back a ways because I didn't want to be right there when those doors opened. But I watched anyway. They swung the doors wide open, and the trailer was completely empty. No pallets, no straps, no cargo at all. The floor looked clean, like it had never been loaded in the first place. I actually walked closer to get a better look, thinking maybe I was missing something in the shadows, but there was nothing there. One of the guys gave me a strange look and asked if everything was okay. I told him I had heard movement the whole way, knocking and scraping sounds from inside. He just shook his head and said the manifest showed the trailer was supposed to arrive empty. Everything had gone exactly as expected. That answer didn't sit well with me at all. Later that same day, I called dispatch and gave them the job number. They told me they had no record of the pickup, the route, or the delivery. It was like the entire job had never existed. When I checked my own logs though, the miles were there, the hours were logged, and the fuel usage matched up perfectly, but the job itself was gone from their system. I still drive for a living. I still take those long night routes and haul sealed trailers when they come up. But now, every time I hear even the smallest shift or thump from the load behind me, my mind goes right back to that night in Arizona and New Mexico. I don't stop anymore unless I really have no choice. I just keep the wheels turning and try to get to the end of the run as fast as I can. Some jobs leave a mark on you, I guess. This one definitely did. And even after all this time, I still don't have a good explanation for what happened. I'm not sure I ever will.